Welcome, everyone, to your Messy Brilliance podcast. I'm Kelly, and I am really excited today to be here with one of my personal sheroes, Roshi Joan Halifax. So let me tell you a little bit about her. First of all, the first time I heard Roshi speak, it was at the Omega Women's Leadership Conference about 4 or 5 years ago, and it was with Elizabeth Lesser, and it was the most incredible transformative experience that I had to really listen to this incredibly wise human being come from a place of authenticity that I don't personally think I've experienced myself yet. And I just actually had an experience when I heard her speak, and the words and the wisdom and the guidance just kind of went into me. So I'm really excited to be speaking with her today about her new book. And let me tell you a little bit about her. So Roshi Joan Halifax, she's a Buddhist teacher, a PhD, a Zen priest, an anthropologist, and a pioneer in the field of end-of-life care. She is founder, abbot, and head teacher at Upaya Institute and Zen Center in Santa Fe, New Mexico. She received her PhD in medical anthropology in 1973 and has lectured on the subject of death and dying at many academic institutions and medical centers around the world. She also received the National Science Foundation Fellowship in Visual Anthropology, was an honorary research fellow in medical ethnobotany at Harvard, and was a distinguished visiting scholar at the Library of Congress. I mean, it just goes on, and we will have more information on Roshi Joan's bio on this interview podcast and on our site at Women for One. Her books include The Human Encounter with Death with Stanislav Grof, The Fruitful Darkness, A Journey Through Buddhist Practice, Simplicity in the Complex, A Buddhist Life in America, Being with Dying, Cultivating Compassion and Wisdom in the Presence of Death, and her recently released May 2018 that we're going to speak about today, Standing at the Edge, Finding Freedom Where Fear and Courage Meet. So let's all ground down, get very present to the moment, and listen to this incredible conversation I had with Roshi Joan Halifax. Well, welcome, Roshi. I'm so honored to speak with you today about your new book and to connect with you for our community at Women for One.
It's a pleasure for me too.
Yes, I cannot.
Very, very exciting, actually. I'm so grateful that you thought about doing this.
Absolutely. I've been wanting to speak with you, as I said in the intro, for several years since really I feel like you embody authenticity, and it's just incredible to hear you speak and the wisdom that you exude. I think the world needs many more of you, and I appreciate you spreading the light. So,
thank you. Some people think one is enough. Okay, so what's on your mind today?
So I'd love to talk to you about the book, but before we get into that, I want to ask you something just about who you are a little bit, because at Women for One, it's all about women sharing their stories and experiences and learning from one another. And you seem to have lived so many lifetimes wrapped up in this one right now as a humanitarian and a social activist, anthropologist, and as a Buddhist teacher. So what do you think the thread that connects all of these things? And what is your guiding passion in life?
You know, I feel that I just did what was before me. And it's not that I had a plan, but it was more that I responded to things that arose, and I had the feeling, here I can serve. Here I can be engaged and offer my life and my energy. So, maybe my guiding passion is a little bit that I'm not afraid to take the next step.
And put whatever's put in front of you to really address it and work with that.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. And, I'm a very curious person. I'm interested in everything. Mm-hmm. I love art. I feel a tremendous connection to the earth. I love scholarship. I love to study. I love to serve people. Just being at the bedside of a dying person, I have the chance to be in the presence of the mystery of a life and the privilege also of a life that's unbinding and to be supportive. So, I'm not a person that is a very fearful type person. It's more that I want to serve. I'm curious. I'm glad I was born into a woman's body. Mm-hmm. So, not much was expected of me. And I had the freedom to do what I wanted, work off of priorities that I felt were based in deep values around compassion, love, concern, and connection.
Mm. Yeah, it was funny. The next question I had was about your major life lessons that you've received through this work and themes in your life. And you just said it, compassion, connection. Is there anything else that you feel are important to your sense of purpose in the world?
I think I'm not afraid to fail. I've learned from my failures. I've learned from my struggles. I have a lot of appreciation for the experience of defeat, if you will, mm-hmm. because I've learned in a way more from my failures than I have from any success I've ever had.
Yes, that seems to be a theme for a lot of wise people in this world. And I'm curious, like, if my community is questioning that. I know I don't enjoy failing, but I don't think I'm afraid of it. So that's kind of
good.
Yeah, right. It's an interesting thing to ponder because there's so many lessons from those failures, whatever they may be. Right. So, okay, I love your new book, Standing at the Edge, Finding Freedom Where Fear and Courage Meet. And I was very sad to say I'm in Seattle and I heard you came in January and I didn't hear about it. So I'm going to come the next time you come to Seattle, wherever you are.
Seattle I really did have a lot of fun. Beautiful people. And actually, I wasn't there in January. I was there in April, toward the end of April.
Oh, okay.
And the first time I got to hold the physical book in my hands was actually at that event in that bookstore. So that was really fun for me.
Wow. And I think I heard about the book more after you did that. Sorry, I saw an ad from January, but I think I heard about the book more after you did that in Seattle. And it's such an incredible, I feel like it's alive when I hold it. I'm holding it right now. I just love this book because you talk about this standing at the edge. And I love the title, Standing at the Edge. I am a mom of 6 children. I have 3 bonus children, I call them, and 3 of my own children as well. And they talk about that edge a lot. And their ages 18 to 23, about how this edge in their life that they stand on and look at, it's somewhat tempting to go over to the other side, to the edge. So I just love that title. And I wanted to ask you, how do you define the edge, standing at that edge?
Well, that edge is where 2 ecologies meet. One of the ecologies is characterized by a lot of strength and health, by resilience, and the other ecology is characterized by a kind of toxicity and danger. And my basic perspective on how we live our lives, that it's important to see the entire landscape of our human experience, and not just the good part and not just the so-called bad part, but to have the kind of courage and wisdom to be able to really take in the whole landscape of human experience. So it's exactly at that edge that I have lived most of my life.
So it's not this or that, it's both. It's not an either or, it's an and, is what you would say.
That's exactly right.
Right. And I love that. And I've been contemplating that because I too have a curiosity, and I've had one my whole life about, what the shadow side of our lives is and how we achieve that balance of not ignoring it, but, owning that we all have that and yet not always living in it. So can you talk a little bit about that? I just can't wait to hear what you have to say.
Well, I don't know. I don't know if it's going to help that much. But, I think it's pretty common for us to fall over the edge, for us to find ourselves in a, complicated situation. I talk about the edge states of altruism, empathy, integrity, respect, and engagement. And the shadow sides of those edge states, are pathological altruism, empathic distress, moral suffering, disrespect, and burnout. And it's very easy for us to fall into any of those, the toxic side of these edge states. And what really builds character is not just our capacity to maintain perfect balance at the edge, but it's when we struggle up, if you will, the steep incline from having fallen over the edge and learned important lessons, and including the lesson related to humility. And I think that's where wisdom, in part, is realized.
So you're talking about when you struggling back up from that other shadow side of things and learning the lessons and wisdom to move into those more pure edge states. Is that what you're saying? I'm just trying to clarify.
The health, yes, the healthier aspects of the edge states.
The healthier.
So
Okay.
it's, we don't have to actually seek problems. We don't have to seek catastrophe. Don't worry, we'll find it. Or it's more like it will find us. That's just the nature of our human experience, that even the Buddha, even as he was dying, Mara, who's the kind of devil, but it really is a devilish state of mind, appeared to the Buddha as he was in the experience of dying. And, it is exactly that kind of testing that we go through in our own developmental process, which proceeds throughout the entire lifespan, that allows us to cultivate wisdom.
I love that. Is there any state that you're particularly drawn to right now in your in where you are in your life that you're working through?
I'm at that place in my life where I feel a lot of resilience, tremendous gratitude, appreciation for the capacities that I have to be able to still be out in the world in the way that I am. I have a deep meditation practice, which is the kind of heart and backbone of my life. I'm not currently in a mess. So who knows what will happen later today? But, my current situation is very, a lot of joy.
That's wonderful. It's great. So how did you not decide, but where did these 5 edge states evolve from to write about in the book? Like, how did you, because I wrote a book and it's called Your Messy Brilliance. So it is about being in the mess and being okay with it. But how did you select these specific themes for the book?
It was not difficult. I've sat with caregivers, politicians, CEOs, humanitarians, dying people in the prison system. I've sat with hundreds and hundreds of people over many, many years, listening to the struggles that they experience in the process of serving others. And slowly I began to see a kind of landscape, or the contours of a landscape, that were defined by these 5 characteristics that I describe in deep detail in the book. And I realized, a world without altruism is a world that is not safe. A world without empathy is a world where we're dead to each other. And a world without integrity is a world where we are debased. And a world without respect is a world that is where we are plunged into harm. And a world without engagement is a world that is flat. So these were all the book really represents the voices of hundreds of people who became my teachers as they shared their journey with me.
Yeah, I love that, what you just said. And I was especially drawn to the idea of empathetic burnout, as you mentioned. And, many people can end up giving up too much of themselves, right? And that's not good for anyone involved. And I've definitely noticed this characteristic in me and a lot of women who are used to this self-sacrifice, because many of us are taught as women, right, to see it as a virtue, even though it can be so harmful. So I just wanted to know what your experience with the burnout that comes from empathizing too much, and how do we turn it around?
You know, in social psychology, it's called empathic overarousal, and it's leads to empathic distress, and that, of course, can lead to burnout. And it can arise from too much, altruism that becomes altruism that's pathological. So what we do, is I feel that one of the most important things is to understand how our mind and body, how they work. And one of the ways that we learn about our own subjectivity is to explore it through the medium of contemplative practice. And one learns where one's triggers are, weak points are, and you begin to strengthen your capacity to actually present suffering, for example, and to regulate your emotional response, and to be able also not to over-identify with the suffering person, but to be able to make a distinction between self and other. And what is really critical in all this, of course, is our intention. Our intention is to do the best that we can to end suffering, but also not to cause suffering to ourselves.
I love that. And it's funny that you're saying all this, because I pulled up one of my favorite things you talked about in the book was about compassion. And I just, if you don't mind, well, I'd love for you to read it, but I didn't ask you to have your book in front of you. But I have it in front of me. If you wouldn't mind me reading a couple of sentences and then speaking to that. Is that okay?
Yeah,
Cool.
I'd be
Okay.
honored.
So it's on page 205, Compassion at the Edge, because I really want to dive into that definition of compassion. It's really up for me in my life right now, understanding, embodying, understanding the word compassion and the theme of compassion. And you talk about how it's the antidote. And what you said here is, when we're at the edge, in danger of falling over the precipice into suffering, compassion is the most powerful means I know for keeping our feet firmly planted on the earth and our hearts wide open. When I heard the little Nepalese girl's cries as her burns were being cleaned, compassion helped me stay grounded in empathy and navigate away from empathic distress. When I've confronted the systemic violence of war, racism, and sexism, and environmental degradation, compassion has reminded me of my values, helping me to act from a place of integrity rather than getting mired in chronic moral outrage. And I can go on and on about sitting with dying people and volunteering. I mean, that that those few sentences really struck my heart, because I feel like in this world right now, this is where we are, where it's like we either are the victims or we're blaming. We're in that victim mentality. And I just wanted to ask if you could speak to the theme of compassion and how we can all apply it to ourselves and to the world.
We could say that compassion is truly a win-win situation. From the perspective of research that's been done in social psychology and neuroscience, it appears as though there is no downside to compassion. Well, that is pretty uplifting, and it it benefits not only us but others. So one has to how can I say this? One has to look more deeply at how to cultivate compassion that is deeply rooted within our own experience. And one of the things I discovered, which is, a pretty interesting way to look at compassion, is that compassion, in fact, is made of non-compassion elements. It includes attention and attentional balance, intention, and also prosocial affect. That is, prosocial affect, we're talking about mental qualities that include kindness and so forth. It also includes insight as well as embodiment. And these are all capacities that are trainable. And as such, It means that when we work on the development of these different capacities, when they interact with each other and settle into a kind of harmony with each other, compassion is the outcome. Compassion arises from the process of the interaction between these suite of capacities. So compassion is really an amazing human capacity. I believe that it is a natural capacity, but often it gets covered over by the kind of conditioning that we experience in our society. And so, in a certain way, we're encouraged in the medium of practice to be archaeologists. In other words, to kind of unearth compassion, or to provide the elements so that the seed of compassion can grow.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I love all that. So, what happens with, how do you connect compassion with forgiveness? Forgiveness of your own actions, forgiveness of others, and how can you move into compassion more from that forgiveness? I've always wanted to ask you that.
Yeah. So forgiveness is this process that allows us to recognize that even though we might have been betrayed or harmed in some critical way, that we have insight into the suffering of the person who has caused us harm, to recognize that, the state of mind that they're in, the conditions that they're in, are conditions that are characterized by suffering. So I believe that genuine forgiveness arises out of love and also out of insight.
And compassion, you think, as well?
Well, compassion, of course, arises out of love and out of insight.
I mean,
Absolutely.
forgiveness arises out of compassion. I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that. If we can cultivate compassion.
Well, at a certain point, you realize that the person who has caused you harm, that is the suffering also. So, for
Right.
example, in recognizing, maybe there's a politician that you think is really awful. And then you realize, you look deeply at that politician and you realize, oh, even the state of mind that he or she is in is characterized by suffering. So suffering is not just in the experience of people who are dying or who have been victimized. Suffering also is a state of mind of people who are angry or fearful or cruel. And it's coming to terms with the truth of that, and to not identify with the state of mind in ourselves that wants to mete out cruelty, harm to others. So forgiveness is a kind of naturally arising capacity. This is characterized by insight and love, as I said.
Mm-hmm. I love that. And it made me think of the other part of your book, which is about engagement and embodiment. And I've noticed a lot of your Facebook posts these days have been like, we really need to get present to what is going on. We can't turn a blind eye. That's not compassion. That's not kindness. We have to engage and embody. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, there's a lot to be said for embodiment, one of which I, just can't do in the context of this short encounter with you, but that the experience of embodiment is very interesting because the body holds a tremendous amount of information. And the more attuned we are to our body, the more, if you will, the neural networks associated with self-attunement open up to our capacity to actually be attuned to others. And so it's really fascinating, particularly the work around interoceptivity, where our capacity to read our own visceral processes, to be, sensitive to what's happening in the body. Not everybody is. And moreover, many of the training experiences, for example, of clinicians, dissociate from the body.
Yes, this body is important and it is teaching us all the time. And when we're not morally aligned, or when we're empathically over aroused, or when we're experiencing pathological altruism, or when we're disrespected, our body is going to know it before our conceptual mind is. So, therefore, the training in attunement to our physical processes can be very important for us.
Right. So using your body as that vehicle.
Exactly. That's right.
Right. So the engagement piece of what I'm asking about, though, how do we, as human beings, as citizens of this world, and as human beings, do ourselves justice, and as women, because the community that I have created and that has been created around me is all women, really engage from that compassionate space and not in that distorted shadow space that a lot of us are doing to fight against the suffering.
So, tell me your question.
My question is, so you're talking about, when you talk about engagement, I'm curious, when we as citizens of this world, there's a lot of people that are taking action right now of things that they believe are wrongdoings, right? Or that they've been wronged. How do we do that from a compassionate space instead of such an angry rise up space?
Well, in the section on integrity, I address the issue of moral outrage.
Yes.
And as you recall, and I think that it's important for us to understand that when we feel there's a moral violation, it could be sexual harassment. It could be that we are very deeply against sending our sons to war, or our daughters to war. It could be that, men in the workplace are paid more than women, and so forth. There's a lot to be morally outraged about. And a little touch of moral outrage is probably not so bad, because it kind of initializes one into action. But chronic moral outrage, just being caught in the grip of a sort of victim's perspective, is not going to be helpful at all. So, my basic feeling is that, again, what contemplative practice allows us to do is to really deepen our own experience, to understand that we are not, we can expand our subjectivity in such a way that we have insight into the truth of our interconnectedness, and also into the truth that each of us is unique, but that it does not serve us or others for us to take the stance of a victim.
Right. Absolutely. I agree. But I love that you're saying, a little bit isn't so bad. It's the chronic moral outrage from what I heard before. It's that chronic, always in blame, always feeling like you're the victim. Some of it it's percentages is what you would suggest, correct?
Right, and not a very high percentage. It's just not healthy to be polarized and upset. So,
right. Right.
But a little bit is okay.
Right, right. And I love in the book you talk about a compassion practice where you're practicing grace. I thought that was so great. I love those kind of things. How different people like different practices. That really supported me in the practice that I'm committed to in my life. So I appreciate that. And I guess I just wanted to also ask you, what are your next steps after this book? Where are you? What is in front of you right now? As you talked about before, you address what's in front of you in your work.
Well, yeah, what's in front of me is that tomorrow, or this afternoon, wonderfully enough, Porter Swensel, who is a PhD and also a scholar he's Pueblo himself, he's Tewa himself, and he's a scholar of Tewa culture, that he'll be giving a talk at Upaya. I'm really excited about that. And then we'll be going to San which is an archaeological site that his people came from,
Wow.
hundreds of years ago. And then his mother, Roxanne Swenzel, who's a renowned artist, will be going to this phenomenal museum called the Pu'e Center, where her work is exhibited, but also the entire history of the Pueblo culture of the American Southwest is the sort of history is all kind of in that museum. It's just amazing. And we're really looking at, the ancient traditions of Southwestern culture. So that, for me, makes me really happy. It means I'm going to be out in the natural world tomorrow, and out in the natural world the next day up in my refuge. And it just enhances my disposition. And I just came down from the refuge. I have a hermitage. My actual hermitage burned down on the 14th of December, so I'm staying in another little tiny place up there. But I go there to renew myself. And last night, full moon, which is Wesak, celebrating the birth of the Buddha, and just such a beautiful time. And all the coyotes were out in that valley just singing the moon.
So
It made me
wonderful.
so happy.
That's so, and what's great is you're talking about what's in front of you the next couple of days. I can hear birds in the background where you are. So
Yeah,
it's just, you're out in nature right
exactly.
now. So that's just incredible. It's just been such an honor, my honor, to speak with you about this book. And I encourage everyone, I read it. It's such a deep dive. I'm turning 50 this year and I'm traveling. So I'm just going to keep diving into it, to this book, because it's
Great.
incredible. And Roshi,
Well,
thank you so
thank
much for
you.
your time. I'm so
It's
honored to
been
speak
a
with you.
total pleasure. And, I think this book, Standing at the Edge, Finding Freedom Where Fear and Courage Meet, it will serve many, many people. And I'm so grateful you brought me onto your podcast.
Oh,
And
I'm so honored. So honored. So go get the book, and thank you, Roshi. We
all
appreciate you
right.
and your service in the world.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.